David, let's talk a little bit about the politics of this impeachment saga. On the surface, on one hand, it appears that we are in a bit of a stalemate, waiting to see what happens between Mitch McConnell and Charles Schumer and a whole host of other things. But on the other hand, we're seeing some movement with some of the comments that have been coming out from Republican senators, some of the ads that have been aired so far, targeting some of them. And I want to play you this soundbite from Senator Blumenthal earlier in the evening here on MSNBC. Watch what he had to say.
I think that Mitch McConnell eventually will be forced by these cracks in his implacable wall, as reflected in Lisa Murkowski's comments, and by other colleagues who are saying it privately. The question is, will they say it publicly? Will they act on it?
Now, according to Senator Blumenthal, there are about 5 to 10 Republicans who have severe misgivings about the way Mitch McConnell has handled this so far and where he has positioned himself in this process. Let me get your take on where you see the situation as it stands right now. Where are we in the process?
Well, I think part of those misgivings are because McConnell went out there and he said out loud what you're not supposed to say out loud. They were rigging the trial. We're supposed to hold the trial and be jurors, but we're going to be working lockstep with Donald Trump's defense. I think that makes it look bad. So even those senators who wanted to vote to have a minimal trial, a quick trial with no witnesses, and get this over and done with, now look like they're doing it because they're in Trump's pocket, which is indeed the case. So I don't think, some of them just don't like the fact that this was said out loud. The others who believe, possibly, that it's their constitutional responsibility to have a full and fair trial, I'm waiting to see, anyone make a forceful case. Murkowski said she was disturbed by Mitch McConnell getting in bed with Donald Trump and then his legal team, his defense team. No one else has really said a peep. And we keep waiting, collectively for Mitt Romney and Susan Collins and others out there who keep telling us that they're troubled, they're concerned. They worry that they're going to actually take a strong stand. And it'll be a hard stand for a Republican to take. And that has not yet come. It's like Christmas is over. We still have some shopping days left to the end of the year, but we're still waiting for anyone to take a really firm and hard stand in terms of having a fulsome trial. And until we see those people speaking out loud publicly about that, I would not bet on any single one of them to come rushing to the defense of the Constitution.
I wonder if any of that, David, would be buoyed by the fact that the approval rating, or I should say the number of people who approve of the Senate removing President Trump has shot up over the last week, Hayes. It's now 51% approve, 42% disapprove. This is in a poll by the Political Morning Consult between December 19th and December 20th. So pretty significant that it has shot up so quickly. What do you attribute that to?
I attribute that to the fact that we're finally past the stage where, the president might be impeached. The president could be impeached. The president has been impeached. So that's, I think, started to change the way people are thinking about this. It's gone from being sort of an abstract thing where people have heard about Ukraine. They've heard that something bad happened. There was a call transcript that they're supposed to read, but most people haven't. But now articles have been debated. They've been passed. And so we're moving from where we're just making predictions and guesses to something where this is actually happening. So once we figure out what the trial will actually look like, I think that's going to be a determining factor. Now, we look at the polls and we try and glean something from them, but it's been really hard to try to match up what the polls say with what politicians in D.C. have been doing. Because if you try and make a comparison to, say, Nixon, for example, or even Clinton, the poll numbers for Nixon were, in terms of impeachment and removal, they were lower. There was a lower approval rating for that when Nixon resigned than Trump has right now. In the Clinton years, we hear people talk about, there's going to be, a blowback against impeachment. During the Clinton years, that happened because the president was historically popular. He was at 60-odd% approval rating. When you look at the president, that's not the case. You see some independents sorting to wonder if the whole process was even worth it. But you don't see Republicans in the House or Senate really sort of following that right now. So I think once we come back into session, we look at the numbers, then we look at what Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer can get to in terms of agreement, if anything. Because if not, that's when it becomes the job of senators like Romney and Murkowski, et cetera, because once we get to a Senate trial, it's majority vote on everything.
Glenn, let me ask you about this possible agreement between Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell. Obviously, witnesses at the center of it, documents, facts, all of that. If you were involved in this case, would you want to see Rudy Giuliani among those witnesses? Because I think that from the names that have been floated around, the 4 names that the Democrats want to go after, Rudy Giuliani is not on that list.
So as a prosecutor, we have a hard and fast rule. We are only allowed to call to the witness stand and sponsor the testimony of somebody we believe to be telling the truth. So I think your question answers itself, Eamon. Would I put Rudy Giuliani on the stand? Not in a million years, unless I had him locked into grand jury testimony, because then he can lie, he can spin, he can deflect. But I could use that grand jury transcript to both impeach him. Ironically, it's called impeachment when you use a prior sworn statement against a witness to prove he's lying. And I could actually use that grand jury transcript to prove the truth of the matter in the grand jury. So I think he is the last witness I would want to call, but
Right.
I sure would like the Mulvaney's and the Boltons for the drug deal.
Yeah.
My first question would be, John Bolton, whatever you saw was so obviously illegal. You called it a drug deal. That has one connotation. What did you see? Those are the kind of witnesses that I would want to present.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.